Hey all, here OS Reviews. You're watching our throwback retro look at the Nokia X7 Journey. This is a smartphone that came out in 2011 with Symbian Anna and was later upgraded to Nokia Bell OS. So this is one of the last Symbian OS powered smartphones in Nokia's lineup, along with the 808 PureView, which is an iconic smartphone that had that 41 megapixel camera, still pretty amazing here in 2018. So the X7 can still be found on Amazon or eBay. In fact, I purchased this one, which is refurbished for under 40 bucks, which makes it a pretty cheap backup phone. And the X7 is marked by these very sharp edges and bold design choices that made it look very unique. Also had front-facing speakers, which should sound excellent. In addition, it had a 4-inch AMOLED panel, so still should produce fairly vibrant looking and saturated looking colors, along with a 8 megapixel camera. However, other elements of the hardware are definitely showing its age. The X7 at the time was really not the fastest phone on the market. In fact, it only came with a 680 megahertz single core processor, an ARM11 based chipset, along with 256 megabytes of RAM. So again, these specs probably won't hold up very well if you try to do a lot of web browsing or gaming here in 2018, but nonetheless it was sufficient for the Symbian platform at the time. It also came with Ovi maps for turn-by-turn directions. There's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and again, at the time it was one of Nokia's flagships. Alright, so in this very classic looking box, we have access to the phone right on top here, which is still in its original plastic sheath, and it seems like in this little tray here, there's actually the SIM card holder. It's a little strange that this isn't attached to the phone right out of the box, but there it is. And underneath here, we have the instruction manuals and documentation guides, back when we still had lots of those included with most phones. There's a get to know your X7, so there's a diagramming that shows how you can sync information, warranty information, registration information, so on and so forth. And there's also a phone recycling bag if you want to recycle your own old phone, and it looks like we have a very old Nokia device up there. And below here we have a charger, which has just a traditional USB based port, along with a pair of earphones, it looks like. I have these in-ear style earbuds, which are made out of silicone, and then this flat ribbon wire that prevents tangling, along with a gold-plated connector and a inline mic that's actually made out of aluminum, so it feels very solid in construction. There's dedicated volume controls, answer call key, play, pause, and skip tracks, along with a microphone. And there's a little bit of diagramming that tells us how to put in the SIM card tray onto the edge of the phone. The volume rocker and the dedicated camera keys are at this kind of curved edge, and the phone has this metallic aluminum back that makes it feel, again, quite solid, along with some plastic tops and bottoms, probably for the antenna for better reception. So this is the SIM card tray. The other side also has a micro SD card slot for expanding the memory. The top has the micro USB port for charging, a very interesting looking power key, a 3.5mm headphone jack, and the aforementioned stereo speakers, which have, again, this very bold looking design with these jagged edges on all of the sides of the phone. So the phone is booting up for the very first time. The battery is completely drained, so I've plugged in the micro USB charger, and as it's doing that, let's do a quick size comparison. So up first, we have a more modern 5-inch phone. This is a Xiaomi Redmi 4X Nokia N9, another very iconic phone that used the MeeGo OS. It's a newer device, but it also has a 4-inch AMOLED panel, so as a result, you can see that dimensions with the X7 are actually very similar. Beginning with the lock screen, we are greeted to the very pretty looking AMOLED panel that has deep contrast between the black in the background and the text that's showing up in white. What's interesting here is because AMOLED is highly energy efficient when displaying darker colors such as black. In fact, it uses next to no power. So in this particular mode, if you want to quickly glance at notifications and the time, it also takes up very little battery. I can also tap on unlock to access, again, the full UI. Here we have larger kind of rounded off icons for the various apps, and we also have a more fluid experience in terms of dragging between different home screens, and it's a lot more similar to modern Android and iOS as we know it today, as opposed to previous iterations of Symbian, which were closer to Windows Mobile. Not a very user-friendly experience and more catered towards business professionals, and oftentimes you would need to use a stylus because lots of icons and text were really small and difficult to press with your fingers. With the Symbian Anna/Bell OS, we have, again, a capacitive screen that supports multi-touch, and the experience as a whole is a lot easier to use. Tapping on the home key here, we have access to all our apps. Again, very reminiscent of Nokia's MeeGo OS. What you'll notice is these little dots. That means that these applications are currently open and it's running in the background. In fact, I can long hold on the home key for a few seconds to bring up the multitasking drawer. From here, I can quickly switch into different apps or close them out completely. So it's actually pretty easy to use. So let's do a quick look at the web browser. This is actually the default one that's built on in. Let's try something like the New York Times. The first thing I'm noticing is that the keyboard is tiny by 2018 standards. It's just because the screen is a little bit small. Luckily, if you wanted to, you can also use the accelerometer and you have a much more comfortable experience here in the horizontal view. The keys are much easier to press. But as a whole, you can see that web browsing experience actually is better than I expected, just because at first I didn't think that pages would even load because many security certificates should be out of date. But you can see that at least the mobile versions of these sites are actually loading up in respectable speed. And that includes many of these images as well as videos and ads that are integrated onto a complex page like the New York Times. Interestingly, Nokia has built in quite a few web apps into the phone already, including a shortcut to YouTube. Now, it's not really a specific app that they designed, rather it's just a redirect to mobile YouTube, as you can see here. But what is a little bit surprising is that it still is, for the most part, fully functional. And we tap on Watch Video, for instance, it will still load up. Obviously, the quality here isn't great, at least not by default. And if you play around with the settings, including the resolution, as well as full screening the video, it actually isn't really a bad experience. So again, surprisingly, these things are still fully functional right out of the box, instead of relying on us to install a newer browser, such as Opera Mini, for instance. So the browser is still passable. Obviously, you're only hampered by the speed, since the phone was never really super fast to begin with. Otherwise, we have a reception and battery information on the top right-hand corner. We have quick shortcuts that take us to the clock, which are also apps that Nokia have redesigned from the ground up. And this is Nokia Maps. This is the Ovi App Store, which allows you to download more games and productivity titles if you wanted to. Taking a look at some preloaded media, again, the phone shows off its AMOLED display, which again has very good contrast. And we can also double tap to zoom, pinch in and out. There are even a few preloaded clips, which is a good opportunity to also take a closer listen at the speakers. And they seem to be coming out actually from the two edges here, but if I cover them up, sound is still coming out from some of the other areas, so a very clever overall design. If we pause it there, we can tap on details, and this is a 720p video, as you can see there. Alright, so tapping on this again to go out, we can also again look at some of these beautiful wallpapers that Nokia has built on in, some of them again which really take advantage of the AMOLED nature. Moving into the camera experience, I have two sample images here. The first shot that was taken relatively further away from the lens with the flash turn on. This was actually at night, so not the best lighting environments. It takes a few seconds, as you can see there, for the image to really snap into focus. That's just because, again, the processor here really isn't super fast, so it takes a little bit longer for it to do some of these computational tasks, but as a whole, really not bad. You can definitely make out all the letters on these textbooks that the camera is looking at. So as a whole, it does a pretty good job for landscape shots, far away shots. But when you're trying to capture objects very close to the lens, this is where the X7's camera seems to struggle a lot more. In fact, it makes me suspect whether it really is an autofocus sensor or not. Certainly isn't a Zeiss sensor like they built onto the N9, which does have overall better quality. Just again, it seems like edges are a lot more fuzzy. At least colors, however, are accurate. And as a whole, the software still makes the experience easy to use. Now we can also launch into the camera just by tapping on the shutter key on the side there for a few seconds, and it will open up this app. The interface here is very clean. I have digital zoom on the side here, a shutter key which is actually pretty quick to capture an image. I can also just tap on the shutter key physically, of course, to take a shot. I can edit this directly, and there's actually a video editing tool built on in, which we'll show you later on. Kind of fun to play around with. I can record video up to HD resolution, and tapping on here, I can also change the face detection mode, color temperature, things like that. It gives me quite a few more advanced settings to play around with. The music player also has a pretty attractive looking interface. It shows cover art without any problems, and you have this animation that flows between different songs, very reminiscent of older Apple iPods cover flow. Over here, we also have additional applications, which include a separate folder for games. Surprisingly, there are two actually pretty graphically demanding games built on it, including Gameloft's Asphalt 5, and an arcade-style shooter game that uses also the accelerometer. Obviously, these games are older than the titles currently sitting in the Google Play Store and the iOS Store, but you can still find plenty of older titles if you wanted to online. So right now we have it set up to use just the touch controls for moving left and right instead of using the accelerometers. And here's the second game, which is Galaxy on Fire. And again, it gives us the accelerometer controls if we wanted to use it, which actually seems to be quite sensitive, and again, shows off the vibrancy of this AMOLED panel. We also have a voice command app built in. It's nowhere near as advanced as Alexa or Google Assistant as we have it today, but you can still tell it things like call a certain number or send a text message to someone, and it's going to do that for you. Under Office, there's a surprisingly good selection of productivity tools built in, including a dictionary file manager, as well as Quick Office and Adobe Reader, which allows you to both view and edit documents such as Word, Excel, and PowerPoint when on the go. As far as call quality is concerned, this is an area that really doesn't change even with the passage of time, and the X7 is still a very capable smartphone because it has multiple noise-canceling microphones, and it actually does a great job even when you're outside in relatively loud environments. Reception quality was also quite strong when I tested it out with T-Mobile and AT&T here in the Seattle region. So that's more or less the Nokia X7 revisited in our throwback video. Should you still get one here in 2018? I would say probably not, unless you're really interested in Nokia's product history, you're interested in smartphone history, and you want to take a closer look at this operating system. I was, however, surprised that many of the features and apps are still functional, including the Ovi Maps as well as the web browser. I didn't encounter any pop-up messages or warnings that you typically find in older phones that tells you, oh, the security licensing is out of date, you should update the browser, which is perfectly fine because you can always just install Opera Mini and find something else to use instead. But on here, I didn't even have to do that. Sure, the browsing speed is nowhere near as fast as on a more modern smartphone, especially a flagship one, but it's still passable, and you can still view back YouTube as well as use many of the programs on here without too many issues. And I was, again, a little bit surprised that the games also showed that the phone is still capable of handling some of those 3D titles, despite the fact it doesn't even have a single-core 1 GHz processor. Further evidence that Nokia did really a great job back in the day of optimizing the phone to run well on less powerful hardware, just like what Apple tends to do today with their phones. So thanks for watching this look-back video here at OS Reviews of the Nokia X7, a very interesting and bold-looking smartphone that ran on the short-lived Symbian Bell/Anna operating system, and you can check out more details in our article, but for now, this has just been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. This has been the Nokia X7.